Welcome to Souljourns, and to something new. What you're about to see is the beginning of a new series of occasional stories by retired physicist Al Drucker about and related to Indian holy man Sri Satya Sai Baba. These newly updated stories will complement the many Souljourns interviews with longtime Baba devotee Al Drucker previously posted to the Souljourns website. A few words about Al now as you see photos of his many interactions with Sai Baba. In 2015, Al Drucker turned 88. As a child, he came to America with his family fleeing Nazi Germany. As an adult, he worked as a physicist and became a specialist in air-to-air and intercontinental missile guidance systems. He later became expert in America's ballistic missile programs. Well, eventually Al was led to rethink his working role in society, after which he shifted his focus to more humanitarian pursuits, and to Sai Baba. It was during Al's spiritual immersion of the past 40 years that he made over 25 trips to be with Sai Baba from America to India. Eventually, he stayed in India for 9 years in pursuit of spiritual awareness. All the while, he was given remarkable access to Sai Baba. He taught at Sai Baba's ashram, had countless interviews with Baba, spoke publicly at Baba's command, and had many personal experiences through Sai Baba. And while living at Sai Baba's ashram, Al also reverted to some of his earlier interests by teaching classes and lecturing on astrophysics and aerospace topics at Sai Baba's University as a visiting professor. The cornerstone of Drucker's adult life has been in seeing how everything in life is intended to help point one in the direction of discovering the Atma, our true self, to awaken to our one and true identity. With Al Drucker's permission, Souljourns begins this new intermittent series, what Al Drucker calls his opus, one of his most important works. It is a new account written just this year called A Theory of Everything, or Nothing. Due to its length, we present it here in 3 parts, beginning with part 1. And we also present the full text of this story, also in 3 parts, posted on our Souljourns website, which you can access at souljourns.net. And now Al Drucker with part 1 of A Theory of Everything, or Nothing.
Hi, I'm going to be speaking to you about a paper that I wrote called The Theory of Everything, or is it a theory of nothing? I'm going to be reading this to you. I have a monitor set up right behind the camera. I'm doing this alone. I have no helpers. And it's just an inexpensive camera, but I hope it'll serve for this purpose. And so I'll just get going with it. I started it out with this little koan, you might say. It says that nothing is gained by thinking only of yourself. Everything is gained by thinking only of yourself. Of course, in the first sentence, I was speaking of the little self, the false self, small s self. And the second, I was speaking of the true self, the Atma. That is all there is. That is the Sachidananda, as we're going to be speaking about it a little bit later. So nothing is gained by thinking only of yourself. Everything is gained by thinking only of yourself. So as an introduction, earlier this year, my wife Yanni and I went to see a remarkable movie. Many of you have seen it also, The Theory of Everything, The movie chronicles the life of the brilliant professor of theoretical physics and mathematics at Cambridge University, Stephen Hawking, who is still very much alive some 50 years after doctors told him that he was probably going to die from his debilitating illness. He's now in his 70s, has 3 kids, some grandkids, has been through 2 marriages. And all these 50 years or so, he's been without any control of his extrinsic musculature anywhere in his body. He's been totally wheelchair-ridden and able to communicate only through, although quite magically, through a synthesized electronic device. And amazingly, with a great sense of humor, he's able to keep doing original cutting-edge physics on a blackboard which I assume is wholly within his head. Now, Hawking and an international band of cosmologists believe that they've come up with the holy grail that evaded Einstein for over 30 years, which was to mathematically combine the 4 basic forces shaping the universe: the gravitational, the electromagnetic, the nuclear strong force, and the nuclear weak force. Einstein never succeeded in coming up with a unified field theory. But using a combined quantum relativistic formulation of gravity, including inflation, supersymmetry, and string theory, a group of worldwide theoretical physicists, including Hawking, believe they've managed the job decades later, and they now call their brilliant achievement the theory of everything. Hence, that name was used for the popular movie that I mentioned earlier. Their physics formulation is called M-theory, and descriptions of it can be found on Wikipedia and YouTube postings. And before I express my opinions really on all of this, I would like to say a few words here about myself that relates to the subject. I have a background in engineering and physics, having at different times been a ballistic missile designer and a university science professor. But I've also been deeply immersed for nearly, almost 50 years in the Eastern teachings of the non-dual Advaita Vedanta, with its unambiguous view of the ultimate reality. What I will show in what follows is that theoretical physicists, in their careful avoidance of spiritual and religious themes, have totally ignored to account for the single most important factor, which is the eternally unchanging, energizing field in which everything is embedded and on which any concept of the universe must be based. They have ignored what in Sanskrit is called the Sachidananda. I already mentioned it once, which makes up the basis of all that is. This Sachidananda is also known as Brahman or Atma, so many different names, as well as the Supreme Ultimate. These all speak of the same one true reality, seen from different perspectives. In the absence of the empowering factor of Sachidananda, the observed universe with its complex structure and history could not exist. The Sachidananda field is present and active right now, whether we know it or not. But when we consciously take it into account, the world as we know it and our place in the greater scheme of things appears very different and much more cheery. For then a true theory of everything emerges, in which the mind and heart of man plays a much more important role than the physics of inchoate matter. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Sachidananda. It'll be spoken of throughout this talk, so don't get too concerned if you don't quite understand or if it feels like too far out or however. It's a totally different view of reality. To begin with, I want to point out that Sachidananda is not the creator God of the Judeo-Christian belief, nor is it the Allah of the Muslim belief, nor is it some aspect of the Buddhist belief. Sachidananda is not related to any religious belief. It is not an objective entity that we can study or exalt to superhuman status and pray to, nor is it something arcane, abstruse, esoteric, unreachable. Quite to the contrary, it is a totally ubiquitous and common field. It is the underlying basis of whatever is, because it is the fundamental essence of what you yourself are. Since Sachidananda is the inherent, intrinsic foundation of who you are, then whatever you touch, whatever you see, whatever you think, will necessarily be painted by either the unseen brush of Sachidananda within you, or by what has been imposed by Maya, by illusion, to cover, supplant, and suppress the knowledge of Sachidananda in your mind. So although Sachidananda is always natively present in you as your true immortal self, and it can never be expunged from you, it can be hidden and overridden with a false reality, which takes the form of the illusory world we all believe ourselves to be in as separate individuals, with no hint of the Sachidananda's presence within us. But parenthetically, it is Sachidananda, our true reality, whether it's known or not, that provides all the energy for the illusion of this unreal world and the separate selves to appear in our deluded minds. Much more will be said on this subject further on in this discussion. But for now, I want to point out that Sachidananda is the one reality. And absolutely nothing can exist without it. Because it is present in you as you, Sachidananda will be present everywhere that you believe yourself to be. Think about that a moment. That's a radical discovery that's being presented. Nothing can appear to be anywhere outside of you that isn't first already within you. Therefore, whatever is being perceived by you had to have been projected there by you, or have some other way come from you. From that it follows that to properly study the universe, you need to study the man. I'm speaking to the physicists who work so hard on all their equations and deep thoughts to come up with a story of the universe and kind of leave the man aside. I'll just repeat it again. To properly study the universe, you need to study the man. And we'll be talking a lot more about that. Being one with Sachidananda It is you, the immortal, eternal, real you, immortal, real you, that determines the ground of all being, the very isness of all that is, the one incomparable, indivisible background field that provides sentience to all beings and energizes all apparent activity. As such, you are wholly beyond time, space, and situation, and you are inclusive of everything in time and space that can be perceived, and without exception, everything that can be thought of. Sachidananda cannot be directly perceived by your gross senses, but nevertheless it can be known, not in the usual way of perception or analysis, but intuitively, as we'll see further on. When we remove whatever is divisible, changeable, time-dependent, or position-dependent, anything that appears or disappears, anything that is individually identifiable, anything that is remembered from the past or expected in the future, anything that can be thought of or has not been thought of. But all of this is removed, and what is left is the Sachidananda. In other words, when there's nothing left, when everything inside and outside, perceivable or conceivable by you, is gone, your world, your body, your mind, your knowledge, your history, your identity, your self-awareness are totally gone. In that apparent emptiness and absence, there still remains a permanent, subjective, subtle, undisturbable, and incorruptible awareness, the eternally existing I, beingness, which is you. And although it can be covered and hidden from awareness, in reality it can never be reduced. That is the unchanging field of Sachidananda. Now, the key factor about Sachidananda is that it is purely subjective. It is the I am of being. That's represented by the Sat of Sachidananda. It is the I that is aware. That is the Chit. It is the I that delights in itself, independent of anything in its field of awareness. That is Ananda. Being the subject, it is never an object. In other words, it's not an entity to be studied and known, nor is it something that can be lost, like your keys or your smartphone or your health or your memory, and then be searched for and perhaps newly found or acquired. No, it is just I, the true I, without any reference to anything else or another. It is not a something that is aware of itself. It just is itself, being itself. As subject, it is always center stage and the source of all awareness. It cannot be destroyed or blown away or changed. However, it can be hidden deep within layers of occluding superstructure of make-believe, covered by a seemingly impenetrable fog bank, somewhat like a nuclear winter that seems to have permanently extinguished the sun. Yet even then, the sun of Sachidananda is not in any way affected. It is always present and ready to shine forth and reveal itself. At that moment of revelation, its powerful presence is realized along with the realization that it has always been there. From the relative viewpoint of the worldly perspective, from the individual, the seeming individual, the unreal but nevertheless experienced individual, Brahman, the eternal macrocosm, is spoken of as Sachidananda. Just as surely, Brahman is also the microcosm, the one eternal self. As such, it is known as the Atma. As has already been indicated, the Sat of Sachidananda refers to pure being. The Chit refers to pure consciousness or awareness, and the Ananda refers to pure joy, love, delight. The terms really, Brahman, Sat, Chit, Ananda, Atma, Self, the real you, they all mean exactly the same. They are eternal, unchanging, subtle, subjective, and independent of time or space. They are one, the one reality, behind your worldly identity of name and form, and the many characteristics, physical, mental, emotional, subtle, and biographical, by which you define the I that you use and unknowingly misuse to represent yourself. Right behind that personal I, empowering it, is the true I, the Atma, which is one with Sachidananda, and which we've also referred to here as the real you. The whole world and everything in it may totally disappear, along with the familiar I character that you believe you are, that personal I. But the true I, the real you, will remain untouched. It cannot disappear. It may have been hidden and then newly revealed in your awareness, but it will always have already been present there, wholly unaffected by anything else that might have previously appeared to have been there and have come and gone. But that which always is never comes or goes. So to repeat what has been mentioned above, when you apply the process of detachment to everything that is in any way connected with yourself, by removing all that is time-bound or space-bound, and all that is special or different, then what is left is the immortal self, the Atma, the true self, always one with Sachidananda. It is this self that energizes, motivates, and underlies all manifestation, all sentience, beingness, and consciousness. That is the real you, the one who alone is who you truly are, have been, and will always be. But being subject and not object, we will probably never be able to study it and scientifically prove its existence or non-existence. These ideas that I've just been speaking of are very difficult to comprehend from the point of view of a time-bound, space-bound individual trying to make sense of it all. It is near impossible to describe the indescribable, an attempt to make it comprehensible. It's no wonder that so few have any notion of its presence here, and everywhere, at all times. It may be strange to hear of it, and yet it is closer to you than even you yourself while you still believe this yourself, this individual which you call I or me with its body, mind, and name, to be who you are. For who you really are is the Atma, the Sachidananda, the Brahman. Call it what you will. It is the nearest of the near, even when it seems to be the farthest of the far, hidden as it is and unreachable by our most trusted tool for understanding, namely the human mind. Unfortunately, minds are trained to see differences, but not to see what is always the same, what is never changing, always equally present everywhere. Consequently, the mind is totally inadequate for apprehending the Sachidananda, the true reality. But I'm sure that by the time you make it through this article, you will have a pretty good intuitive sense of what that one eternal reality, which we're speaking of here, feels like, tastes like, even if you don't exactly know in your mind what it is. Now I want to look a little bit into the physics that's being proposed by these modern-day physicists. This very, very brilliant work they've been doing. Before I do, let me just mention that all of this that I'm reading is an article that's contained in the article section of my website, which is Atma-Institute. That's ATMA-institute.org. And you can find it there online, and you can follow it if you care to here. So I'm going to speak about two conundrums in physics. And in general, let me say that physics tends to avoid the supernatural, that which is not readily describable or understandable through established physical principles. So it is only because it could not otherwise be accounted for that physicists had to acknowledge that something unexplainable and far beyond their equations appears to be happening in the cosmos. And two conundrums immediately come to mind, namely one, the need to make the universal laws of physics and the history of the universe comply with the requirements for the existence of human life on this planet. And two, the need to account in the physicists' so-called theory of everything for dark mass and dark energy, which together account for over 95% of the as yet unknown mass of the universe. Dark matter and dark energy are a total enigma about which very little or nothing really is known, but which are totally unlike any of the known atomic matter that conforms to the standard model of physical particles, and which applies to all the known physical atomic-based matter in the universe. Dark matter and dark energy, which are not directly visible, but have been detected by their gravitational effects, appear to be totally outside of physics as we know it. There's almost universal consensus based on a wide variety of measurements of accelerating universe expansion and observations of the cosmic microwave background radiation and of infrared observations of satellite and ground-based telescopes, that dark matter and energy exist. But unfortunately for physicists, our known physics is of little value in understanding them or knowing their origin. It turns out that our known physics applies only to less than 1/20th of the visible, observed, or inferred universe. So let me say a few more things about dark matter and dark energy. I'll take up the second of these conundrums, which is about dark matter and dark energy, first in this discussion, and hopefully dispatch it quickly here, since so little can be said about dark matter and dark energy, considering how little is known about them. In respect to dark matter and dark energy, there are many quandaries that need to be dealt with, but have not yet been adequately understood. As has already been mentioned, the laws of physics that we use and believe to exist, including the Standard Model, as it's called, of particle physics, which was recently completed just a year or two ago by the discovery of the Higgs boson and the Higgs field, which this whole model of particle physics describes the organization of atomic matter in the known universe. But it applies to less than, as we already mentioned, less than 5% of the gravitational mass in the universe. This atomic mass, is called ordinary matter. As for the rest, a little over 25% of the total mass of the universe, or five times the matter that we understand to some extent, that 25% of the mass is in the form of dark matter, which is subject to gravitational attraction, but it's invisible to us since it doesn't exhibit any of the other familiar properties of atomic matter, such as being subject to the electromagnetic force or the nuclear forces, all of which permit us to hypothesize, understand their makeup. And then, overriding both ordinary and dark matter, there's about 70% of the total mass of the universe, which is in the form of dark energy, that inhabits all the previously believed empty vacuum of space. And I might just point out, parenthetically, that dark energy is subject to gravity because of Einstein's special relativity, energy mass equivalence. E is equal to mc squared, the energy mass equivalence. So there's some mysteries. This dark energy mysteriously appears to have been present in the universe for only about half of the total 13.8 billion years of the existence of the universe. And it mysteriously has the effect of accelerating the expansion of the universe by applying a pressure that is opposite in direction to the attractive force of gravity. But the dark energy continues to accelerate the expansion of the universe even when the density of matter has become vanishingly small. In other words, although the density of ordinary matter and dark matter in any fixed volume of the expanding universe is constantly decreasing because the universe we now know is expanding. And so that density gets diluted with time. The dark energy, unlike anything else we know of, appears to be unaffected by the expansion, and it remains undiluted and constant with time. In other words, it really appears to be independent of both time and the density of ordinary matter. So as ordinary matter gets further and further apart from each other, and our nearest stars retreat increasingly from our view, and even the planets and the sun in our solar system move increasingly further and further apart from each other, and the gravitational attraction between all these various bodies decreases more and more as the universe is exponentially increasing the distance between them. The density of the dark energy is unaffected and continues to accelerate the expansion of space, even as the gravitational attraction between objects gets smaller and smaller because they get further apart. So as we'll see further in this discussion, the only field that I know of that acts independent of time, independent of position and the density of matter and is ever unchanging is Sachidananda. So there are a host of questions left unanswered by modern physics. And the principal one, as I see it, is the presence of the Sachidananda background field, which will not even be found on physicists' lists of questions that they believe they need to study. It just hasn't reached that point of consciousness as yet. So we'll leave the curious subject of dark matter and dark energy behind now and go back to the first and principal conundrum facing theoretical physicists that was mentioned previously, which was involved with coming up with a unified understanding of the universe. The first thing that theoretical physics has to deal with was the inescapable need to come up with a universe that permits the existence of intelligent human life. Specifically, the physicists recognized that there is a totally improbable and unbelievably vast number of synchronous events, which range literally into many orders of magnitude, that all had to somehow come together in order to select this particular universe with its particular physical laws and dimensions out of a megaverse of innumerable other similar, like universes. This is necessary, and it's supported by the physics formulations, because it is this particular universe that alone has the favorable parameters for the existence of intelligent human life on this particular planet, revolving around our mid-sized star at just the right distance and in just the right elliptical orbit to permit the formation of life. Our star, the sun, being a later generation star, has just the right mass and the range of internal temperatures, and fortuitously is in a part of the galaxy that escapes the disruptive field effects of other nearby stars and the galaxy's massive central black hole. Furthermore, it is in a region where it can initially arise from the gaseous ejecta of much more massive, much hotter, shorter-lived stars of an earlier period of the universe, which finished their existence by exploding as supernovae in their super-hot explosive fireball, which is an order of magnitude hotter than the interior of our sun. The conditions were ripe for nuclear fusion to produce the higher elements beyond the primordial hydrogen and helium that were the first elements to form after the Big Bang, the origin of the universe. Also, the physical organizing forces and parameters of this universe were such that the solar system as we know it today could be forged from previous generations of exploding stars that would then support the eventual emergence of life on this perfectly positioned planet. After billions of years of volcanic activity, forming the intersecting plates of oceans and land masses on the surface of our planet, these finally cooled and stabilized into something close to the topographic formation of the Earth we have today, which provides conditions to appear in which single-celled prokaryote bacteria could emerge. Then after a further millions upon millions of years of primitive one-celled life, sufficient O2, oxygen, appeared in the air to support more advanced single-celled eukaryote DNA-containing life forms, which have a nucleus, which could mutate into multi-celled plant and animal life. In this way, life progressed on the evolutionary tree to ever more massive life forms. And as their empowerment rose and waned, other types of higher life forms appeared, leading eventually to this relatively momentary pinprick of time, which culminated in intelligent human life. And that intelligence was capable of hypothesizing the progression of vastly improbable synchronicities and conditions that brought us to this point in time. It's a marvelous story. But it ain't true. It ain't true. Before I go much further, I want to point out that this article is not intended as an argument for intelligent design. An intelligent designer would certainly be an obvious conclusion from this story, looking at the totally unfathomable number of factors which all had to come together for us to appear here and give meaning to what we seem to be discovering here. Surely there must have been a super intelligent architect. Do I dare call him God? Or perhaps a genius alien from a super advanced other world, who would tie all this together and make out of all these improbable parts a home for us to be in. A designer or a creator might provide some answers that satisfy. But eventually that would raise many more questions than it answers. And so that is not the direction this article will take us. Intelligent design, or a creation story with a divine creator, is not the argument I will advance here. The principal argument that this article will advance is the recognition of the illusory nature of the world and questioning the universally unchallenged beliefs in the reality of time, the reality of space, the reality of evolution, the possibility of individual separative life, the reality of birth and death, and a few others. In other words, I challenge you, well, More correctly, I invite you to be open to question just about every firmly ensconced belief that you've held about yourself, about everyone else, and about the world around you, beliefs you may never before have opened to doubt. I will show that we believe ourselves to be creatures locked into time and space. And as such, it seems quite natural to come up with an evolutionary time story involving the cosmos and biological evolution, which starts with the dramatic beginnings of the Big Bang and through a succession of evolutionary happenings ascends to ever greater levels of order and organization, leading from the ancient birth of the universe through successive exploding stars to synthesize the higher elements such as carbon, oxygen, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, iron, etc., all necessary for life, then forming our solar system and our particular planet, and step by step providing the favorable conditions for organic molecules to come together and for life to evolve despite all the pitfalls along the way. This then would lead to the present expression of intellectual human life. But unfortunately, this story is a work of fiction that is made up. It is not the true history of life. Using their sharp mental acumen, theoretical physicists have come up with some of the most brilliant mental constructions, but not realizing that Maya, illusion, and its ego thought system, which they, the human beings themselves, have originally installed, that these are orders of magnitude even more brilliant than they, that Maya is much more brilliant than any human mind can express itself as. Unknown to them, Maya continues to have them completely flummoxed while it continues to spin out illusions that are universally believed to be real. These then raise questions which only tortuously yield to analytical understanding, and these scientific understandings are then seen as great victories, when in truth both the questions and solutions are devoid of meaning and have little or no relation to reality. For example, physicists now hypothesize that as a result of applying quantum mechanical and relativistic principles to a vacuum, the universe, as we know it, got going with a stupendous explosion of incredibly hot, incredibly dense space. This Big Bang explosion was not unique to our universe, but occurred and is presumably still occurring over and over again, millions upon millions of times in hyperspace, with each primeval explosion creating a separate universe with its own laws of physics and space-time characteristics. One of the countless universes that resulted from all this activity is ours, which had the right parameters and force fields for just the right size star and the rightly positioned planets, or this planet really, to create molecules of water, a blanket of oxygenated air, stable chemical conditions, and all the other myriad details, including a mild range of temperatures, food, and air for molecules of life to appear, and eventually morph into human life as we know it. As already mentioned, this evolutionary history, starting with the beginning of the universe, which evolved all the way to advanced human life, makes an awesome, incredible story. But nothing could be further from the truth. As we'll see, you are not in the universe. The universe is in you. What the cosmologists do not realize is that pure being, expressing itself here and now in human existence, is not the end product of the universe's long evolutionary history. What that story does not account for is that pure being is eternal, ever unchanging and independent of time, space, physical laws, and universes. This particular universe, which happens to conform in its history and characteristics to the particular evolutionary story that's being currently entertained in 21st century physics, cosmology, this universe is contained within being, and not vice versa. In other words, it is not that they developed a favorable universe from scratch that set the stage in a linear evolutionary progression over 13.8 billion years for humans to be here, but that you, not as body, but as pure self, are already here. And we're always already here. And this universe is merely a grand story concocted by Maya and its ego henchmen, along with space and time, to give meaning to a phony world and false entities that have insinuated themselves into awareness, just as dream does in sleep. As the product of Maya and its ego thought system, this hypothesized universe manages to totally hide the unchanging reality, replacing it with a world of untruth, characterized really by subterfuge and false creation that is posing as truth. This chimera is empowered and given sentience by the very reality whose existence it ignores or denies. But there's nothing really happening here. The world we know, with its complex and exquisite history, appears to arise, but it is just an illusion of truth. It has no real existence by itself. The only presence that exists here and everywhere is you, the one eternal consciousness, the Atma, the Sachidananda, the one reality in which time, space, and universe play at the game of reality. Well, more on this will follow. Let me just say, getting back to my experience of the Hawking movie, after watching it, I realized that having spent the last 30 years on other pursuits, on primarily spiritual and teaching alternative healing, acupuncture, homeopathy, other alternative systems, I haven't kept up with the latest theories of physics. In the intervening years, following the early 1980s, at that time I was teaching astrophysics subjects at the SSS Institute of Higher Learning, which is a new university in India. But since that time, I've not had much interest in cosmology. But this movie stimulated my interest again, because intuitively I could feel something was awry with this explanation. So to get myself going again, I read Hawking's brilliant books. A Short History of Time is one book. The Grand Design is the more recent book, as well as a couple of more theoretical, technical books by a leading physicist. And I spent a month devouring those books. What I came away with was a huge wow at the brilliant physics that has been happening these past few decades. But at the same time, reflecting on my total conviction in the non-dual Advaita Vedanta that my teacher in India taught, I realized that from an Advaitic perspective, from a non-dual perspective, all this celebratory physics talk of having achieved the culmination of the greatest human intellectual achievement of all time was specious, questionable, beautiful as it was from an intellectual perspective. In my non-dual Advaitic eyes, it represented more a theory of nothing instead of the much lauded theory of everything. Now I realize this is a pretty brazen assessment coming from this 87-year-old challenging some of the greatest intellects on the planet. But I feel undeterred. Based on my own spiritual experiences, I have absolute faith in the correctness of the Advaita Vedanta and its Upanishadic teachings, and so will continue by digging in further.